So while I was at CPAC over the weekend, I talked to lots of great Americans. I mean, lots of great Americans, elected officials, thought leaders, just a lot of great people there. One I got an opportunity to interview was Congressman Jody Hice. Congressman Hice is from Georgia. He's been in Congress. He won in 2015, so he began serving in 2016. So he's been there, just, I guess, at 3 terms, or he's in the middle of his 3rd term. And he has now announced he's not running again for Congress because he's running in Georgia for Secretary of State. And this kind of ties into the whole election issue and election fraud issue that we talk about on this show. So Jody Hice, I happened to have met him at a conference in Florida a couple of years ago. So I had talked to him once. Just a really nice guy. He actually went to seminary school. He's a salt of the earth. Really nice, really warm guy, just a great guy. And he's stepping down from Congress. And to be really clear, he lives in a significantly Republican majority district, meaning he's a very safe seat. He could just keep running for Congress probably for a long time and stay in Congress. And he's been very influential. He's very articulate and very well respected among his colleagues. But he is stepping down to run for Georgia's Secretary of State. And you may recall during the 2020 election cycle and the aftermath, the election cycle, there was a lot of attention being paid to the then current, or still current, Georgia Secretary of State named Raffensperger, who was the one, among other things, was the one who was on the phone with President Trump. And afterwards, Brad Raffensperger, was on the phone with President Trump, and that call became the subject of inquiry about whether or not Trump had, kind of tried to arm twist the people in Georgia to question the outcome of the election. And many Georgia Republicans were very disappointed that the Secretary of State, with tremendous authority over election process, procedure, certification, that the Georgia Secretary of State did not in any way validate what was becoming the obvious increasing evidence of election fraud. He kept saying, no such thing, can't see it here, I don't know what you're talking about, no such thing. And he continued that into the new year. So there are several other people also challenging Raffensperger, but Jody Hice, I think, has the most gravitas about him, the most seriousness about him. And he's running, and Raffensperger's running again. So Jody Hice is challenging Raffensperger as a Georgia Secretary of State. I did a quick interview with Jody Hice and play that for you. I'll tell you a few more good things about that. Actually, one more quick thing. Matt the Wonderful. So I sent Matt a copy of an endorsement. The day that Jody Hice announced he's running for Secretary of State, Donald Trump endorsed him. And so this is March of this year. Her good news, one of the most outstanding congressmen, Jody Hice, has announced he's running for Secretary of State in the great state of Georgia. He's been a steadfast fighter for conservative Georgia values, staunch ally of the America First agenda. Unlike the current Georgia Secretary of State, Jody leads out front with integrity. I have 100% confidence in Jody to fight for free, fair, and secure elections in Georgia in line with our beloved Constitution. He'll stop fraud, he'll get honesty back into elections. Jody loves the people of Georgia, has my complete and total endorsement. So now, having shown you that, I'm going to ask Matt the Wonderful to play this interview. I just had a recording microphone, didn't have a camera, so I just, passing it back and forth between me and Jody Hice last weekend at CPAC. As I mentioned, I had the great privilege of going to the CPAC conference here in Dallas and ran into some different people. I was so excited they were available to talk to me for a few minutes. One is member of Congress from Georgia, Jody Hice. If you recognize that name, he's been in the news a lot because he has been in Congress since 2015, and he is now running for Georgia's Secretary of State. And just this morning, I think it was, or a couple of days ago, President Trump endorsed him, which is the best thing to help that race along. So without further ado, I want to say hello to Congressman Jody Hice.
Debbie, great to be with you. Thanks so much. Yeah, we're in the fight of our life for our country right now. And, for me, the heart of it comes down to having free and fair elections. I believe that's on the heart of everyone pretty much in America. They understand that if we lose honest elections, we lose everything. And we've got to get this right. And so that really is what's causing me to transition, frankly, out of a very safe congressional district. But we've got to defend our election integrity.
I love that you're saying that. I was going to comment. I did happen to know your district is a really safe Republican one. And honestly, in Washington, you're a fighter too. So to decide to leave Washington and move towards Secretary of State of Georgia had to be a big decision. And so I'm going to guess that's tied directly to the Georgia alleged outcome of the elections in 2020. So tell me where I think Georgia has a lot in play. Georgia has the potential for information coming out related to a recount or an audit that may change the outcome of the Georgia election. So where do we stand on that?
There's a lot happening. You're exactly right. And Georgia is very much in play. There is a forensic audit that is now taking place. I spoke with the attorney who is leading that up just 2 days ago to get an update. I really am not free to share a whole lot, except to say they are finding a lot of significant issues, and they are just getting at the tip of the iceberg, and already a lot is happening. On top of that, just yesterday, the Federalist broke some breaking news that there were some 35,000 people in Georgia who moved from one county to the other, and yet they voted in the county from which they moved, which is illegal. Over 10,000 of those have already been absolutely confirmed, and there's probably another 10 to 15,000 that's in process of being confirmed. That changes everything. It's a systemic problem in that case that involves every House district, every Senate district, every congressional district, every county in the entire state. So this is not just focused in Fulton County. This is a problem that was statewide, where we had tens of thousands of illegal voters voting in a county in which they did not live.
Before we turn the microphone on today, you were mentioning to me, we were talking about the Arizona audit is soon to be released to the public. I believe the Arizona Senate is now looking again at the same audit that's been completed. And you were talking about the idea in Georgia, there maybe actually are kind of run for the money, who gets the information out first about their audit. But I didn't realize until we were talking, I've only been focused on the outcome of the presidential election. You were indicating that in Georgia it may be that the outcome of this audit shows that the 2 Georgia Senate races, which, as we talked about in the show many times in the past, in an odd, fluky circumstance, Georgia was electing both members of the U.S. Senate from Georgia at the same time. That outcome of both Senate races may also now be in question. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I mean, and I'm so proud of Arizona. Arizona is doing a great job at auditing, and now Georgia is as well. I don't know which one of them will come out with the first information, but I believe that both of them are going to come out with information that President Trump actually won. But in the case of Georgia, as you mentioned, it is not just the presidential race that is at stake. For anyone to believe that Georgia, a red state, elected 2 of the most radical left-wing Marxist senators in our nation is just unthinkable. I'm convinced it didn't happen. So if this audit comes out and the investigation, the election investigation that is underway comes out, indeed, that President Trump won, obviously, what that also means is that David Perdue won, very likely Kelly Loeffler won, and so instantly we have not a presidential election at stake. Look, if Georgia proves that Trump won, that's one thing, but still you need 4 other states to come up with the same conclusion. But if it can be determined that 2 Republican senators won in Georgia, now that changes our entire nation, because no longer is the Senate under the leadership of Chuck Schumer, but it comes back under Republican control. And that very likely, or very possibly, I should say, is hanging in the balance of the investigation, the forensic investigation underway in Georgia.
I'm smiling while you're speaking because I actually had no idea that was likely, but obviously it makes sense. If you're going to do the audit of the Georgia election, you're going to be looking at the votes for Senate also. That would be a game changer. I'm going to research later how exactly what the logistics are, how you change that outcome, what has to happen within state government to change those 2 Senate seats, but there has to be a way. We cannot allow that kind of fraud to stand once it is proven. I want to switch quickly. I know you have another speaking thing to go to, but switch quickly to the situation in Congress. In America, conservatives, and we were actually just sitting here at CPAC talking to strangers who are just chit-chatting in the hallway. People are aware that the January 6th episode at the Capitol, involving some people engaged in some wrongdoing, but that it seems to be being manipulated by Nancy Pelosi, by the Democrats, really morphed from a few people who were out of control and behaved badly to an alleged insurrection, and it is being used by Nancy Pelosi. In fact, there was an announcement this morning of a new large multi-million-dollar fund they're creating for further investigation of the January 6th incident at the riots at the Capitol is a good word for it, not insurrection. Just want to get your read on it. Do you have a sense Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are politicizing what occurred on January 6th?
Yeah, there's no question they're politicizing this, and now they're even going beyond politicizing. They're weaponizing it for their own political purposes. And what I mean by that, they're coming against those of us who are pushing back. I'm a ranking member in the Oversight Committee, so our committee has tremendous jurisdiction. We've had multiple hearings on the January 6th riots, whatever you want to call it. And yes, it was wrong. And I've condemned what happened on January 6th, still do. But what the Democrats failed to acknowledge, and this is documented, there were last summer 574 confirmed, declared riots across this country. And the Democrats have said nothing about those riots. There were businesses lost, lives lost, over 2,000 law enforcement officers injured, and they have said nothing about that. The only reason they're going after January 6th is to harm President Trump, either to prevent him from running again or to injure him politically to the extent that he no longer has political influence. It's all about Trump. It's all about attacking him, and that is why the focus is on January 6th and trying to attach him to that. But listen, he was still speaking when the riot started. So it was there is no physical way that anything he said, it's a 45-minute walk from where he had the speech to the Capitol. To try to tag this on him is physically an impossibility to do, but that's what their attempt is, and it's all for political purposes.
Could not agree more. It's opportunistic politically, and I think the hypocrisy is staring the American people in the face as you talk about the damage in our country. I don't know how many cities where there were riots ongoing for almost a year, property destroyed, businesses destroyed, cars destroyed, lives destroyed, and that is of no interest to this group of this cabal of Democrats in Washington. They're only interested in making sure they can make January 6th from a riot into some kind of actual insurrection, and it is truly it's actually deplorable. To use the correct use of the word deplorable, truly deplorable. I want to ask you if our listeners want to support your campaign for Georgia Secretary of State, is there a website they can go to?
JodyHice.com. It's real easy to remember. It's JodyHice, JodyHice.com. And listen, we ask for prayer support first and foremost, and any other way that people can help us out. Obviously, this race is already taking on national focus. CNN actually came out saying this is going to be the #1 down ballot race in America. There's no question about that. Stacey Abrams and company are doing everything they can to win the Georgia Secretary of State position. And of course, you have President Trump and all of us on the other side. This is a huge race. People are becoming aware of the importance of secretaries of state and primarily of the issue in election integrity. So yes, we encourage people to go to our website, JodyHice.com, and help us out any way they can.
Congressman Hice, thank you so very much for taking time to talk with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for all you do. Keep the torch ablaze.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so that was just too much fun. That was actually at CPAC. We just found a lobby area with a little place you could step to the side, and you could hear a little bit of background noise. It wasn't too bad. Anyway, he was just a great guy, and I'm excited about his campaign and wanted to share what he had to say. I want to add one last point to it before I turn to my next topic. What he's saying, both in what you heard and in conversation before and after our interview, in Georgia, it appears when this forensic audit is completed that, #1, President Trump appears to have won Georgia in 2020, which doesn't mean that the election changes because, that wasn't enough electoral votes, but also potentially one or both of these Senate seats, U.S. Senate seats in Georgia, which, as I mentioned, was a fluky circumstance where they were both up at the same time. part of what you hear people say, even if that is true, if the audit shows that actually the two Republican senators won, or any other audit shows that a wrong outcome was certified, you will hear people say, well, I mean, but what are you going to do now? I mean, and they're, the people who were declared winners are serving, and, we don't have a legal mechanism. We don't know how to do this. We don't know what process to follow. Why don't we just let it go? And in the future, we'll be better about our elections. And I want to say, we cannot let the difficulty of process or of solving a question of first impression, a legal question of first impression, or a complex legal battle, or opposition from the media, or opposition from the left, none of those things can be permitted to cause us to surrender and allow a fraudulent election to stand. I don't know the process, but you'll hear the argument from the left because we can't think of, and frankly, from some people on the right, since we can't figure out a process, we just have to let it go. And exactly the opposite is true. You don't start with the question, can we find a process? And if we do, we'll somehow bring back those two senators and put the ones who actually won in. That cannot be the order of thinking. The order of thinking is the people of Georgia had the right to choose their two senators, and we must go with the truth of the outcome of the election. So the answer has to be truth must prevail. The actual results must prevail. That is the answer. We will follow that, and then we'll step back and say, okay, we're going to have to figure out the process to get there. We can't surrender because there has been so much time lapse since the election, and so many people, move their lives up to Washington, or all the other changes you make. We have to start with utter determination to get to truth, and then when we get to truth, to allow truth to dictate the next step. If the truth is that both Republican senators in Georgia won, then the answer is they need to be representing Georgia in the U.S. Senate. And of course, that changes everything about the balance of power in Washington. Everything. Right now, the Senate is at that 50-50 phase, and we have endless battles trying to figure out what we can get through. We count on one or two wobbly Democrat senators maybe holding the Democrats back from the unbelievably dangerous legislation they're pushing on all sorts of fronts. So that's a big story. We'll follow that. Now, see what happens. In fact, you heard him allude to it, but I was talking to him before we started saying, well, the Arizona audit's going to come out pretty soon. And he said, the Georgia audit might just beat them. It might come out first. So to be watched. But Jody Hice, great guy, Secretary of State. And I'll tell you something else, and kind of ties into our next topic. But the Georgia Secretary of State is not being criticized simply because he wouldn't go along with President Trump. And that's what he and his supporters are trying to characterize. That all these Trump people trying to drive me out of office, I just did my job. My job was to determine the outcome, and I determined that, unfortunately for the Republicans, because the guy's Republican, but unfortunately for Republicans, Biden won, and so it goes. And would not open his eyes and look at the evidence being presented. And he continued that attitude, that stance, moving forward into the new year. So what I want to say about Raffensperger, because it ties very much, who is the incumbent Secretary of State in Georgia, it ties very much into what we're going to talk about next, which is what's happening in Texas, because we have now the Democrats, who elected Democrats serving in the Texas legislature, have flown the coop, have literally physically got on a plane and went to Washington in order to deny a quorum to the Texas legislature. And we're going to get that in just a moment. But to tie back to Georgia, the whole question of what you expect of your elected leaders. Do you expect them to have the courage to push things based on truth, and regardless of how popular it is, regardless of whether or not they're going to be mocked by the media and pummeled by the left, and mocked and ridiculed and scorned and derided by the left, by the media, and maybe by some people in their own party, do you expect that kind of leadership or not? And do you expect the people you elect to stand with truth? Or do you say, well, what was he supposed to do? So Raffensperger is kind of saying, hey, we had the election. It appeared that Biden won Georgia. I'm not going to get involved in this. He didn't have the courage. He didn't have the discernment. He didn't have that grit that says something's wrong here and we're going to look into it. many people assume perhaps Raffensperger was even more than just unwilling to look into it, but perhaps fully aware of the kind of fraud that occurred and in some way was unwilling to expose that, for some reason unwilling to expose that. Whatever it is, this is Jody Hice is being brave. As I say, you could sit in Congress and get reelected for a long time and be respected in Congress and move forward, passing great bills and fighting on things. But he's going after somebody in Georgia who did not have the courage, the backbone, and the grit to stand up. So Jody Hice, I don't know who else is running. Probably other people are fine also. But Jody Hice is one really, really well-respected conservative, and I'm very grateful he's running.